And she mentioned the powerful tool that is LinkedIn. If only we had someone here from LinkedIn to help us navigate this powerful tool. Oh, we do. Our next speaker, Jake, come on up. Jake leads LinkedIn Learning's relationships with governments across North America. He's also the founder of Lighthouse Labs, one of Canada's leading coding boot camps. And in a previous career, Jake, this is amazing, was an IP and international criminal lawyer and had a chance to defend war criminals in Cambodia. Jake, I got to ask, how did that come about? Like, what happened in Cambodia, and where are those friends that you were defending now?
In prison, thankfully, or passed away because it was a while ago. I'm old, but it was an amazing experience. And I had a lot of personal reasons for doing it. My mother's parents were Holocaust survivors. I was a lawyer trying to make an impact at a time that was very focused on international criminal law. It was cool.
And do inmates in Cambodia get access to LinkedIn Learning or not yet?
Not when I was there. In fact, I'm trying to remember, LinkedIn had just started up not too long before that. And I was going into a windowless, clay-built room every day to meet with the individual who I was representing at that point in time. So not a lot of internet.
No gigabit internet there. So why change careers? You started your career as a lawyer. Now you're obviously doing education and technology. Like, tell me about that transition.
It's been a long journey, and I've really loved the path. And one thing that I take from it to encourage others to do is really be curious and expand your horizons. There's almost no downside to individuals early in their career, as I was, being a generalist, really experiencing a wide variety of different roles and then being able to pull those learnings together later in your career. So I went into everything from intellectual property law. I lobbied in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill and in Parliament at Parliament here in Canada. And really found my way to tech first before I got to learning and LinkedIn. I started, as you said, Lighthouse Labs, but before that, we started Functional Imperative, a software dev shop. Couldn't hire enough devs, started a boot camp to trade them. And I was just networking.
Problems, right?
You got it. And I think there's no time like now during this pandemic to solve not only one's own problems, but also for the problems being faced by, the 20 to 30% of the population who are unemployed, let alone those facing health issues, et cetera.
I love that. I love that, Jake. And I know that we're doing tonight is we're connecting a lot of people and talent with employers. But as I said up top, if you want to grab a problem and you want to solve it yourself, now is an amazing time to start a new project, a new business, a new startup. So look, I want to talk about your last transition when you joined LinkedIn. How did you end up at LinkedIn?
Great question.
Did you use LinkedIn to get to LinkedIn?
I did use LinkedIn to get to LinkedIn in part. I had been for many years a hyper networker. I love people, I love ideas, and connecting them is really what drives me. And people actually joked in the early days of LinkedIn that I was Jaked in, and that caught on. So I kept networking manically. And eventually a friend who was at LinkedIn, who in the early days we'd actually talked about him joining LinkedIn, suggested, hey, come on over. I know you're tired of the startup ups and downs. You want to break and want to join a big corporate, and everybody calls you Jaked in. This is the place for you.
Unbelievable. And I'm just going to remind the audience that if you got a question for Jake tonight, just put it in the chat and I'll pick out some of my favorite ones and I'll ask Jake here. And of course, if we have some extras, I'll shoot them over to Jake. We have a text relationship, so he can answer them by text and then I'll put them in.
Jason,
so I want to talk a little about workforce skills, Jake.
Please.
I know you spend a lot of time thinking about the workforce and the gap between what employers want and what job candidates can do. What are some of the skills that are in high demand right now?
Great question. They've changed, obviously. The pandemic's changed things quite dramatically, but maybe I'll start with the universal skills. Some of these have been true way before technology and the internet in the sense that we think of it were ever around. And in fact, both of my previous speakers were commenting on soft skills. People in academia hate that term, and I think they're right to in some ways because what they really mean is foundational or human skills. The skills you can only really learn or evaluate by interacting with another person. Those will always be your most valuable skills. Having a dev from Coursera tell you that you have to learn how to communicate, that you have to learn how to negotiate, that's pretty telling.
Yeah.
And so I think
public speaking and well-being, I loved it.
It was amazing. And honestly, there's nothing that's actually improved my well-being than the refocusing that this pandemic has resulted in. I'm writing a piece on what humanity and human dignity post-pandemic would look like. And I think that tech these days is actually in many ways getting us further away from some of the really meaningful skills like knowing oneself. And thankfully, this pandemic might have given us a window back into that, a portal back into that self reality.
Got it. And so I love that. And do you see that continuing out? Like if we look 3 to 5 years down the road, and maybe we're in a post-vaccine world, like knowing oneself, I don't think ever goes out of style. I think
100%.
maybe even the term comes from before me and you were born. I know you're old, but I still. What are some of the things? What are some of the new trending skills that you see coming up that maybe aren't so hot today, but could be in the near term for people's next roles?
Absolutely. I mean, the current immediate one on pandemic stuff is always remote work, et cetera. And I think figuring out how to be flexible and resilient, those are more on the human soft skill side, but those will 100% continue through the pandemic and continue to be valuable 5, 10 years down the road. Technologically, what I find really fascinating is this progression from when we were trying to run that functional imperative software development boot camp and a software development company, and then founded the boot camp. It was because we couldn't hire enough devs. Interestingly, devs aren't the most in-demand role now, right? We moved on from having software development to things like artificial intelligence and machine learning becoming really in focus. And there's a lot of talk of moving from there to cleaning data, and then even being able to sort through data, figuring out where the human bias in the technology is. So to generalize that, what we're interestingly moving back to is the intersection between humans and technology, and being able to understand and take advantage of that link. There's a great talk that I heard by Kasparov where he once described how a human and a computer always beats a computer or a human. And I think that is really telling for future careers as well.
Yeah, just gotta find yourself a great relationship with a computer, and you're in good shape. Hey, I love this. I would love to know, like, I know you're a continuous learner. You're always you're thinking about these things, but you're also doing them. What was the last course, or what the last sort of new piece of knowledge that you learned recently?
So as I said, mindfulness personally is actually what I've been focusing a lot on. And I've gone obviously to LinkedIn Learning where I work, but I've gone to Coursera as well, and to a variety of open education resources created by Ontario's post-secondaries to figure out how to both learn about myself and integrate that into my life better. If we're just looking at LinkedIn Learning, it's always Excel. I can't ever figure out every function in that software platform now owned by my parent company. And it's also always the most in-demand course on LinkedIn Learning.
Yes. Well, I'd be happy to give you some Excel tutoring if you need it. Is that really, that's the most popular course on LinkedIn Learning?
Consistently. I'm not sure if it is right now. As I said, the pandemic shifted things. There was obviously a point in time there where Zoom was right at the top, which was, again, probably angering my parent company, Microsoft. They wanted it to be Teams. But in the long term, yes, Excel has always been one of the top courses for us, just as a lot of those human foundational soft skill courses have been as well. I always say that if you can have Richard Branson on entrepreneurship, Oprah on communications, and know your Excel or how to code, then you're set.
Yeah. Amazing. And it's funny, but I can't really imagine any career change happening today without like at least a little bit of help from LinkedIn, either if like from the candidate or from the employer. And I can see some questions coming through here in the chat, like, what's really the best way to use LinkedIn? Like, I think maybe a lot of employers out there are jaded maybe by the message box. And so maybe the cold message isn't the right way, but curious, like from you, what's beyond the spammy, unsolicited message that people can use to really find their next career on LinkedIn?
Great questions. I think part of it is actually just using those messages properly, not being spammy about them. So for instance, quite frequently somebody will just hit connect. You always want to personalize that connection request. And even just in those however many characters, like a tweet length connection request, you want to convey both the value that you are able to provide to this individual and of course, how they can help you. And I wouldn't be too blunt in that respect. Generally speaking, the idea of a coffee chat, even online on Zoom or on LinkedIn or whatever else, those are a lot lower touch than I want a job. So start with, I'd love to learn more about your company. This is what I think I can add to that conversation, not to that job or position. And then never maybe in that conversation, bring up a job. Instead say, hey, who else can I talk to about the same subject? Because down the line, if you spiral out and have 3 coffee chats for every one that you start with, you'll end up finding somebody who really just wants to offer you the job or volunteer it.
I love that. I think it was one of the things we talk about at TechTO, which is about the second order outcome. I think if you lead with guns a-blazing on the things that you want right now, sometimes you don't get your way. But if you can stay curious and you demonstrate your interest and your passion and you continue to learn, sometimes those things just fall right into your lap. You must see a lot of weird things on the internal LinkedIn teams. Have there been like some really clever or interesting or funny ways that you've seen LinkedIn used successfully for either an employer or a candidate?
I'll give you the opposite if that's okay. The worst example I've
Yeah,
seen
yeah, the worst ways.
of of LinkedIn, and this is specifically in my early days when I was working on our sales platform, Sales Navigator. And we had a client in the room, and the room was honestly full of men. And this was sort of a classic example of gender bias as well, or probably misogyny. But basically, the guys were asking, why is it when I click on, say, a woman like that, and they pointed at the screen because we were demoing on one of their profiles, why is it that all of the people like them in the right hand panel are also, let's say, attractive women? And I said, is it possible that you're just clicking on attractive women all the time, and that is actually spurring the algorithm in order to reflect what you're clicking on? And of course, everybody in the room laughed and nodded. But I actually think that's related to a much more fundamental problem, right? We talk about echo chambers, we talk about rabbit holes on YouTube. And one thing that we have to take charge of, that we have to take control of, is this technology. We control who we see, who those algorithms spit out, and ensuring that there is diversity there, ensuring that, say, misogyny doesn't shine through there or discrimination doesn't shine through, is as much up to us as it is the platforms. And I think thankfully the platforms are recognizing they have a role to play there too.
Yes. It's a fascinating conversation, I think, around the role that algorithms like that play in, elevating underrepresented voices and ensuring that there's diversity. And so glad that it's something that's on the top of your mind and that you guys are thinking about. LinkedIn's doing a lot of new features these days. I'd love to know, is there like sort of like an underdog LinkedIn feature that doesn't get as much attention as you think it deserves,
100%.
like beyond just the connection request and the message?
There are many. The one that I find in person, and I know that's sort of a weird thing to talk about right now, but the in-person feature that I love most is a Bluetooth feature, actually, where you can find everybody who's in a room with you while you're networking. So I'll explain, or maybe send a link afterwards explaining how to find that feature. But in essence, if you're at a conference, if you get up on stage and you want a lot of people to connect with you, often I'll just say, hey, send me a connection request. Here's my LinkedIn address. It's way easier. You open up the app, you show them how to do it. And I think you guys have actually done this at TechTO in the past. But
well, I was going to say probably a very much underused feature today.
100%.
But yes, it is. If you have been like, if I go look at the polls over here, like those 40% of people who have hung out with us before, they know that I love that. I can recite to you right now how to find it. It's not intuitive, but it is super fun. And what I tell people when they open it up is, and they add hundreds of people. And by the way, there's a limit. Okay, we should talk about removing the limit.
Agreed.
But we say that these are your connections that are going to help you win together. Like, you need a team, you need a community, you need a village to win. And I think when you go in with the right intention, like you said, how do I add value to others? How do I help people with their challenges, with their goals? If we can just like band together, all of us here, and push that forward, we're going to have an unbelievable community, strong, tight knit. We're all going to win together. Jake,
couldn't agree more.
Been awesome having you here, man.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.